The docking clamp had not finished cycling when the St. Bernard put its head through the customs scanner. Voreth Kess watched it happen from the intake booth, a booth designed for the orderly, sequential processing of biological cargo through Waystation Pellic 3 Xenofauna Customs Division, and felt something cold lock behind her sternum, a sensation she had not experienced since the incident with the Crescent venom crawler 4 years ago. The scanner was not built for heads. It was built for sample trays, 16 centimeters wide, slotted through a horizontal aperture that fed into a spectral analysis chamber rated for particulates, atmospheric residue, and biological trace compounds. The dog's head was considerably wider than 16 centimeters. It had entered the aperture sideways, one ear folded flat and the other jammed against the upper housing, jowls compressed into a shape that suggested the animal was not experiencing discomfort so much as a tolerant inconvenience, the way a large person might tolerate a doorframe built for someone smaller. The scanner's internal optics attempted to focus on the sample tray that was supposed to be there, found fur instead, and triggered a cascading fault that lit up every warning panel in the booth. Her assistant, Junior Inspector Pellic, was already on his feet. His neck plates had gone rigid, a Toreshi involuntary response that meant his autonomic system had engaged before conscious thought could form a question. What has it? It has put its head in the scanner, Voreth said. Her voice was level. Her voice was always level. 7 years in customs enforcement on a border transit way station had given her a voice that could describe a hull breach and a lunch order in the same register. But beneath the desk, her hands gripped the edge of the console hard enough that her knuckle cartilage ached. The dog withdrew its head. A rope of drool hung from the scanner's aperture, swinging gently in the recycled air. The spectral analyzer, still cycling, attempted to process the saliva and returned a result that would later become the single longest chemical composition readout in Pellic 3 Customs Archive. 412 unique organic compounds, 16 of which the system could not identify and flagged as unknown biological agent. The alarm upgraded itself, amber to red. "Shut that off," Voreth said. She was already pulling the intake manifest on her terminal. The entry was sparse, filed by the docking coordinator, who had clearly been processing the arriving freighter on autopilot. One line caught her eye and held. Earth origin domestic canine, breed St. Bernard, mass 89 kg, transit classification companion animal, accompanying passenger, human. Destination outpost Varan 7. 89 kilograms. She read the number twice. 89 kilograms of biological organism classified as a companion. The word companion in Voreth's professional vocabulary applied to animals that fit in carriers, that sat quietly during processing, that weighed less than the customs booth itself. 89 kilograms was not a companion. 89 kilograms was a small vehicle. She had processed 11,406 biological organisms through Pellic 3 Customs Division. Venomous arthropods from the sulfur marshes of Keth 7. Bioluminescent parasites sealed in triple-walled containment flasks. Live ammunition, technically, in the form of a Sarathi war beetle that had been mislabeled as a decorative insect and had eaten through its carrier's restraining clip during processing. She had handled every one of them with the same procedural calm, the same methodical attention to the 47 fields on the intake form, the same quiet confidence that the regulatory framework was sufficient to describe whatever walked, crawled, or slithered through her corridor. 89 kilograms of companion animal from a Class 12 deathworld was going to test that confidence. She keyed the intercom. "Docking Coordinator Hrel, this is Customs Inspector Kess. The Earth passenger in Corridor 7 has a biological companion that was not flagged for class assessment. I need the species file from the Galactic Fauna Registry pulled immediately." Hrel's voice came back thin and distracted. "I logged it as routine livestock inspector, The human said it was a pet. It is blocking an entire customs corridor, and it has contaminated my spectral scanner with an unidentified biological compound. Pull the file. She looked through the booth's observation window while she waited. The dog was sitting in the middle of the customs intake corridor, which was designed to accommodate a single-file procession of passengers and cargo through sequential checkpoints. The dog was not single-file. The dog was wider than the corridor's design throughput, and its sitting posture, hindquarters planted, forelimbs braced, chest expanded in the relaxed sprawl of an animal that had decided this was a fine place to rest, blocked the corridor completely. Behind it, a queue of 7 passengers from the freighter had come to a halt. 2 Toreshi merchants were pressed against the wall. A Kalsarathi freight handler, who stood nearly 3 meters tall and whose species was not accustomed to yielding passage to anything, had stopped and was staring at the dog with an expression Voreth had never seen on a Kalsarathi face: uncertainty. The human was standing beside the dog. A woman, late 30s or early 40s. Voreth was not skilled at human age estimation, with dark hair pulled back, a heavy canvas jacket that looked like it had survived more than one planetary winter, and boots scuffed in the particular way that meant working boots, not fashion items. She had one hand resting on the dog's head, her fingers buried in the dense fur between its ears, and she was looking at Voreth's booth with the calm, patient expression of someone who had done this before and expected it to go badly and was prepared to wait while it did. The species file arrived on Voreth's terminal. It was 147 pages long. She read the summary header and felt something tilt, a perceptual shift she knew was not physical but could not stop. Canis lupus familiaris, breed variant, St. Bernard. Origin, Earth, Sol 3, Class 12, Deathworld. The words Class 12 sat on her screen in standard regulatory font, and for a moment her training and her instincts diverged completely. Her training said, remain at station, process intake, flag for classification review. Her instincts said, you are sitting 12 meters from an animal that evolved on a planet where the gravity alone would crush most galactic species, and that animal has just drooled in your scanner. She scrolled to the physical profile. Mass range for breed, 63 to 120 kg, jaw pressure, sufficient to splinter long bone, skeletal density, 45% above galactic mammalian median. Dermal layer, multi-layered coat evolved for extreme cold survival, sub-zero environments, high-altitude terrain. The breed had been developed, the file said, as though humans engineered living things the way they engineered cargo shuttles for mountain rescue operations on Earth's alpine ranges, environments characterized by avalanche risk, hypothermic conditions, and terrain that killed the unprepared with mechanical regularity. The breed's original function was to locate humans buried under collapsed snow, dig them out, and keep them alive with body heat until rescue teams arrived. The dogs worked in conditions that would kill a Toreshi in minutes. They navigated by scent alone, in whiteout visibility, carrying supplies strapped to their bodies. They had been doing this for centuries. A rescue predator, an apex organism whose evolutionary purpose was to save. Voreth closed the summary and opened the behavioral profile. She read 3 paragraphs, stopped, and read them again. The phrasing unsettled her in a way she could not immediately place. Pelican. Inspector. The behavioral profile says this animal is, I am going to quote directly, characterized by an exceptional tolerance for physical contact, a low startle threshold, and a pronounced affiliative drive toward unfamiliar individuals, including non-bonded juveniles of other species. It says the breed has been selectively developed for patience. Patience, Pellick repeated. The word used is patience. The file describes an 89-kilogram apex predator, whose primary behavioral trait is patience. He scrolled further. Under hazard notation, a box section she had nearly skipped, The St. Bernard's physical capability is disproportionate to its behavioral baseline. This breed exhibits one of the widest capability-to-aggression differentials in Earth's domestic fauna registry. It possesses the biomechanical capacity to inflict catastrophic structural damage to standard construction materials and to overpower any known galactic species under 200 kg. It almost never does. The qualifier was italicized in the file, almost. She opened a sub-file linked from the hazard notation. Known incidents involving St. Bernards in non-terrestrial environments. There were 14 entries spanning the last 40 years of human space travel. She read the first 3. Incident 1. Way Station Orville 6, 2287. A bonded St. Bernard, unattended for 11 minutes during handler processing, consumed the contents of a diplomatic gift basket intended for the Sarathi trade delegation, including ceremonial candied insects, a bottle of fermented kelp extract, and the decorative basket itself. The basket was woven from Sarathi mourning fiber, a material with significant cultural value. Diplomatic incident required 3 days to resolve. The dog was described as unrepentant. Incident 2, Transit Hub Kelesh, 2291. A St. Bernard in a cargo bay pressed its body against a heating duct for warmth and over the course of 4 hours generated enough thermal mass to trigger the bay's fire suppression system. 14 cargo containers were coated in suppression foam. The dog was found asleep inside the foam, apparently comfortable. Incident 3, Diplomatic Station Faranis, 2293. A St. Bernard accompanying a human envoy entered the Telvari Meditation Garden during a formal reception. The garden was climate-controlled to Telvari ambient specifications: cool, dry, still. The dog lay in the garden for 20 minutes. Its body heat raised the garden's temperature by 1.7 degrees. Its respiration added enough moisture to trigger the humidity alarm. Its fur shed into the reflective pool and clogged the filtration system. The garden was closed for 2 days. 3 Telvari meditation sessions were canceled. The envoy offered to pay for the filtration repair. The dog was described as very relaxed. Voreth read the remaining 11 incidents. The pattern was consistent. In every case, the damage was environmental, not violent. Not a single incident involved aggression toward any being of any species. The damage was always the same. The dog was too large, too warm, too present, too interested in consuming things that were not food, and utterly, comprehensively indifferent to the administrative consequences of its own existence. She closed the sub-file. Pattern was clear, and it should have reassured her. 14 incidents, 0 aggression, 0 casualties. But the numbers that framed those incidents, the jaw pressure, the bone density, the mass sat in her mind like a locked door behind a curtain. You could forget the door was there. You could drape the curtain and arrange the furniture and live your life in the room. But the door was still there, and behind it was what an 89-kilogram apex predator from a Class 12 deathworld could do if it chose to. Her secondary comm channel pinged. Station Medical Officer Pren. Inspector Kess, I am seeing elevated biosensor readings from Corridor 7. Multiple species, multiple individuals. Heart rate elevation, cortisol fluctuation, respiratory pattern changes. Are you aware of a medical event in the customs processing area? There is no medical event, Doctor. The readings are likely a response to the Earth animal currently in the corridor. The Earth animal, the Class 12. Yes. A pause. Inspector, I am coming down. If that organism is causing physiological stress responses in 20+ individuals, I need to assess whether we have a public health situation. Doctor, I do not believe the stress responses are. The channel had already closed. Voreth exhaled. The station's administrative apparatus was converging on Corridor 7 like antibodies around a foreign body, and the foreign body was lying on the floor with its chin on its paws, being petted by children. Medical Officer Pren arrived before the transit protocol review was complete. She was Drenathi compact, precise, with the close-cropped silver fur and oversized pupils of a species that had evolved on a dim-lit world and compensated with exceptional visual acuity. She carried a portable bioscanner, and she walked into Corridor 7 with the focused intent of someone who had already diagnosed the problem and was looking for confirmation. She stopped at the edge of the crowd. She raised the scanner and swept it across the corridor. Voreth watched from the booth as Pren's expression shifted not once, but 3 times in rapid succession. The first shift was alarm. The scanner was reading 27 biological signatures in close proximity, and one of them was orders of magnitude larger and denser than anything the scanner had been calibrated for in a public corridor. The second shift was confusion. Voreth could see Pren reading the biosensor data on the scanner's display, her pupils dilating as she processed the numbers. The cortisol readings she had flagged from her office, the stress markers that had triggered her response, were there, but they were dropping. Across every species in the corridor, across every individual within 5 meters of the dog, the stress hormones were declining, not to baseline, below baseline. The scanner was showing relaxation responses in beings who were standing in the presence of a Class 12 apex predator, and the responses were more pronounced the closer they were to the animal. The third shift was the one Voreth recognized, because she had seen it on the Toreshi merchant and on the Kalsarathi freight handler and on her own junior inspector. It was the shift from assessment to something else, something the scanner could measure but could not explain. Pren lowered the scanner. She looked at the dog. The dog looked at her. Its tail moved. Pren walked to Voreth's booth. Her voice was carefully modulated. "Inspector, the biosensor readings are not indicating a stress event. They are indicating the opposite. I am aware. The cortisol levels in the beings nearest the animal are lower than anything I have recorded in the station's population during peak processing hours. Some of them are lower than resting state readings I would expect during sleep cycles." She paused. The animal is functioning as a biological anxiolytic. Its presence is measurably reducing stress responses across multiple species, none of which have any evolutionary history with Earth fauna. Are you recommending removal of the animal? Pren looked at the corridor. She looked at the data on her scanner. She looked at Voreth. "Inspector, I am a medical officer. My job is to protect the health of this station's population. Removing that animal would, based on every reading I am currently holding, constitute a net negative health intervention." She walked back into the corridor, stood at the edge of the circle of beings around the dog, and did not leave. She held the scanner at her side and watched, and after 4 minutes Voreth saw her reach down and touch the dog's shoulder, very briefly, with 2 fingers. The scanner in her other hand recorded her own cortisol level. Voreth did not need to see the reading. She could see it in the way Pren's shoulders dropped by half a centimeter. She pulled up the deathworld companion transport protocol, 93 pages she had read during initial certification and never opened since. Section 4. Environmental containment during transit. Minimum requirements: sealed biocontainment unit with independent atmospheric control, backup power, and a biological waste processing system rated for the organism's metabolic output. She looked at the dog. The dog was lying in the open corridor with no containment of any kind. Section 7. Transit personnel exposure protocols. All personnel within 5 meters of a Class 12 biological organism must wear Level 3 BioSeal protection, including respiratory filtration, dermal barriers, and ocular shielding. Nobody in the corridor was wearing BioSeal protection. Section 12. Emergency response. In the event of aggressive display, vocalization, or unprovoked movement toward personnel, immediate area evacuation and armed response team deployment is authorized. The dog's tail swept the floor. Its breathing was the slowest, deepest rhythm in the corridor. Voreth opened the standard biological cargo intake form, 47 fields. She began filling them in, and the form began failing almost immediately. Field 6. Containment classification required for transit. Options: carrier, crate, sealed pod, stasis unit, or full environmental isolation. The dog was lying in an open corridor without any of them. She selected other and typed leash, then deleted it and typed none observed. Field 11. Behavioral risk assessment. Scale of 1 to 7. She entered 1, then changed it to 2 because the drool constituted an environmental hazard, then changed it back to 1. Field 19. Dietary requirements. The St. Bernard's daily caloric intake was listed at 2,800 to 4,200 Terran calories, with a note that the breed was prone to food-motivated behavior, defined as a willingness to consume any organic material within reach that smelled remotely edible, and several categories of material that did not. She thought about the spectral scanner. She thought about the diplomatic gift basket at Waystation Orville 6. Field 23. Grooming and hygiene. The shedding rate she read twice before accepting it was not a unit conversion error. The volume of loose fur produced during a shedding cycle was measured in liters. She thought about the atmospheric filtration system, rated for dust particulates and mild biological aerosols, not for liters of anything. Field 38. Known allergens or environmental hazards posed by the organism. She scrolled through the species file. The St. Bernard produced an average of 1.2 liters of saliva per standard day. The drool was continuous, involuntary, and architecturally indiscriminate. It would coat any surface the dog's jowls contacted, including personnel, equipment, furniture, ceremonial objects, and classified documents. The file noted that the saliva itself was not toxic, but contained enzymes capable of dissolving certain organic adhesives used in standard-issue document binding. She imagined the customs archive. She imagined a St. Bernard in the customs archive. She stopped filling out the form. The woman had walked to the booth window. Up close, Voreth could see details. A scar along the jawline, old and faded, lines at the corners of her eyes, hands rough and competent, nails short and clean. "Morning," the woman said. "I'm guessing you need the paperwork." Voreth looked at her. She looked at the dog. A small Velocity child in the queue, four-limbed, pale green, perhaps 6 standard years old, had detached from its parent and was approaching the sprawled animal with the unearned confidence of someone too young to understand hazard classification. Voreth's chest seized. "Your animal," she said. "There is a child approaching it." The woman did not turn around. She did not tense. "That's fine," she said. "That's what he does." "What he does?" "He likes kids. He'll just lie there." The Velocity child reached the dog and stopped. The dog opened one eye. The child extended a hand. The dog's tail moved once, twice, and then the child placed its small green palm on the dog's muzzle, and the dog closed its eye again and exhaled a long, patient breath that fogged slightly in the corridor's cooled air. The child's parent, frozen mid-step, with the expression of a being watching their offspring touch something that outweighed them by a factor of 15, made a sound Voreth recognized. The sound of a threat matrix collapsing and rebuilding in real time. "His name is Murphy," the woman said. "He's 7. He drools on everything. He ate a couch cushion on the shuttle and I had to pull the stuffing out of his teeth for 20 minutes. He's afraid of the vacuum attachment on the atmospheric recycler." She paused. "He's my dog. Ask me anything you need to ask." The registry classifies all Class 12 biological companions as requiring bonded handler escort with certified competency verification. Your handler certification. "I don't carry a certificate. He's not a working animal. Nobody on Earth certifies a family member." Voreth studied the woman's face. There was no defiance in it, no challenge, no frustration with bureaucratic procedure. There was something more difficult to process: certainty. The kind of certainty that did not need to argue because It had already won every argument it would ever have. Won them not through rhetoric, but through the simple accumulated weight of 7 years of living, alongside an 89-kilogram apex predator that ate couch cushions and was afraid of vacuums and greeted strangers by trying to sit in their laps. "How long have you traveled with this animal?" Voreth asked. 3 years off-planet. I had him 4 years before that on Earth. "And the transit difficulties?" "Every station, every customs checkpoint, every time the same conversation." The woman's voice was not bitter. It was the voice of someone who had accepted a particular cost and paid it willingly. "The file says Class 12, and every inspector in the galaxy reads Class 12 and sees a weapon. And then they see him, and they have to figure out what to do with the difference between what the file says and what's lying on their floor drooling on their equipment. The file is not inaccurate, the physiological data. The physiological data is real. Every number in that file is correct. He could do everything it says he could do. He just doesn't. That's the part that breaks the forms." Voreth looked at the dog. The dog was looking at the woman, not at the customs booth, not at the corridor, not at the queue of increasingly fascinated passengers. At her. Its eyes tracked her the way a compass tracks north, not by effort, not by choice, but by an orientation so fundamental it preceded thought. "The bonding behavior," Voreth said. "Yeah," the woman's voice softened by 1 degree. "That part of the file is accurate too." Voreth's calm chirped. "Station Administrator Vren's frequency. Inspector Kess, I have a Class 12 alert on my board from Corridor 7. Report." "Administrator, the organism is an Earth domestic canine. Breed St. Bernard. I am conducting intake assessment." "A Class 12 biological is unsecured in a public customs corridor. Why have you not initiated containment lockdown?" "The organism is stationary. It is accompanied by its human handler." "I am assessing." "Inspector, Section 4 of the DCP requires full biocontainment for any Class 12 biological in a transit area. I expect compliance. Initiate containment protocols or I will assign an enforcement team. You have 10 minutes. The channel closed. 10 minutes. Voreth looked at the corridor. The crowd around the dog had grown to 15 beings, 7 species. A Toreshi merchant had knelt, her rigid-plated body folding into a posture that Toreshi physiology made deliberately difficult. A posture reserved for ceremonies and the handling of fragile things, and extended a hand. The dog sniffed it with the unhurried gravity of a diplomat evaluating credentials and pressed its massive head against the merchant's palm. The merchant made a sound. Quiet, involuntary, audible through the booth's audio pickup. A sound Voreth had never heard a Toreshi make in a customs corridor. It was wonder. She pulled up the customs rejection form. 3 fields, a classification code, 1 authorized action, return to vessel of origin, denial of transit. She had used it 11 times in her career. Venomous parasites, unlicensed genetic samples, a Sarathi combat organism mislabeled as a therapy companion, a container of earth carpenter ants capable of structural damage to bioresin paneling. Every rejection had been procedurally clean, emotionally uncomplicated, and professionally satisfying. Her cursor hovered over the form. She looked at the child leaning against the dog's ribs. She closed the rejection form. "Pelik, I need you to go into the corridor and conduct a direct behavioral observation. Standard proximity assessment. Approach to 2 meters, document response, retreat." Pelik's neck plates locked rigid. "Inspector, the protocol specifies level 3 bioseal for proximity to a Class 12. I am aware of the protocol. I am also aware that a 6-year-old child is using the organism as a pillow. Conduct the assessment." Pelik went. Voreth watched through the window as he walked into the corridor with the measured, deliberate gait of someone approaching unexploded ordnance. He stopped at 3 meters. The dog looked at him. Pelic's gill membrane flutter ceased. He had stopped breathing. The dog's tail moved. Pelic took another step. The dog lifted its head, and Voreth saw his entire body go rigid, a full system lock, the involuntary freeze of a prey species confronted with something larger, denser, and infinitely more patient than it was. The dog's head was enormous at that distance, the skull broad and heavy, the jowls hanging in folds that swayed when the head moved, the eyes deep-set and brown and utterly, devastatingly calm. The dog's mouth opened and its tongue emerged thick, pink, glistening, and it licked Pelic's hand. Pelic did not withdraw. He stood there, his neck plates slowly softening from combat lock to what Voreth could only describe as bewilderment, and looked down at his wet hand, and then back at the dog. His comm crackled. "Inspector, the organism has initiated contact." "I can see that." "It licked me." "I can see that as well." "My hand is wet. The saliva is there is a considerable volume." "Note it in the report. What is the behavioral assessment?" A pause. The dog leaned forward and licked Pelic's other hand. I am uncertain how to classify this, Inspector. It is not aggression. It is not territorial marking. It does not match any threat display pattern in the xenofauna database." Another pause. "The organism appears to be greeting me." Voreth checked the chrono. 4 minutes remaining. She opened the comm to Vren. "Administrator, I am transmitting a live feed from Corridor 7. I request you observe before dispatching the enforcement team." A pause. Then transmitting. She patched the corridor's primary camera to his feed. On the monitor, the dog sprawled at center, one Velasi child asleep against its flank, a second child approaching, Pelic standing beside the animal with saliva on both hands, the Toreshi merchant kneeling with her palm on the dog's head, the Kalsarathi freight handler motionless 4 meters back. 20 seconds, 30, a minute. Vren's voice returned, the clipped edge softened by 1 degree. "Inspector, what is the animal doing?" "Lying on the floor, Administrator." "I can see that. What is it doing to those people?" Voreth looked at the corridor. The rigid queue had dissolved. Passengers who had been pressed against walls were drifting inward, postures opening, stress indicators softening one by one. A Velasi couple stood shoulder to shoulder, watching the children with expressions that had moved past alarm into something unguarded. A Kolesi data clerk, a species known for absolute emotional restraint, had stopped typing on his transit pad and was simply looking. "Nothing," Voreth said. "It is doing nothing. That appears to be the point. I am extending your window to 30 minutes, but I want a full observation report within the hour. If that animal growls, I am sending the team." "Understood." Voreth exhaled through her gill slits, a controlled release that fogged in the booth's cooled air. She had bought time. She opened a blank incident report and began typing something she had never typed in 7 years of service, a document she was fairly certain did not have a regulatory precedent. Customs Inspector's Observation Note, WASTATION, PLLIK 3. Ray, Earth Origin Domestic Canine, breed St. Bernard, mass 89 kg. Transit Passenger Human, designation withheld per privacy protocol. This animal does not fit any classification framework available to this office. I have attempted to process it under Standard Biological Cargo Intake, Form BC-7, Deathworld Companion Transit Protocol, DCP-93, Exotic Fauna Temporary Holding, EFTH-4, and Emergency Hazardous Organism Containment, EHOC-1. None of these forms contain fields adequate to describe what I am observing. The organism is, by registry classification, a Class 12 Deathworld Apex companion. Its physiological specifications exceed the threat parameters of every animal I have processed in my career. Its jaw pressure, bone density, mass, and endurance profile place it in a hazard category typically reserved for organisms requiring armed escort and sealed containment. The organism is currently being used as a pillow by a Velasi child. Through the window, the Kalsarathi freight handler, the one who shoulder-checked loading mechs, the one who had been frozen 4 meters from the dog for 20 minutes, lowered himself to the corridor floor. He sat with his massive legs folded awkwardly, his 3-meter frame compressed into a posture his skeletal structure clearly found uncomfortable, and extended one enormous hand, palm up. The dog raised its head, considered the hand with the evaluative patience of something that had never needed to rush a decision, and set its heavy jaw in the handler's palm. The handler's other hand came up and rested on the dog's ear, and he began rubbing it with a gentleness that made something shift in Voreth's chest, a sensation she did not recognize and was not prepared for. His enormous fingers, each thick enough to palm a cargo container's locking mechanism, moved through the dense fur with the careful attention of someone handling a precision instrument. Then he began to hum. A low, thrumming vibration that moved through the corridor floor and up through the walls of the customs booth, and settled into Voreth's bones like a frequency she had always been tuned to, but never received. The dog's tail swept once, twice, a metronome of contentment keeping time with the humming. She kept typing. The behavioral profile describes this species as patient. I can confirm that patience is an inadequate word. What I observe is not passivity. The animal is aware of every being in the corridor. Its ears track movement. Its nostrils work continuously. It has registered the approach of each new individual, evaluated them, and permitted contact in each case. It is not inactive. It is choosing continuously to be still. This is the behavioral signature of an apex predator that has made a decision about the room it is in and does not need to revise it. The drool, however, is a genuine environmental concern. The spectral scanner will require full decontamination. I am filing a separate equipment damage report. Her comm chirped again. Corridor Security Chief Tall. Inspector Kess, I have 4 passengers requesting to delay their transit processing to remain near the Earth animal. They are citing a calming effect. 2 additional passengers who had already cleared customs have returned to the corridor. I have no protocol for this. How many beings are currently near the animal? 27. 5 have sat on the floor. The Kalsarathi freight handler has been humming for 12 minutes. My security team is requesting guidance. Guidance on what? On whether this constitutes a public disturbance. Voreth looked at the corridor. It was the quietest she had ever seen it during peak processing hours. No raised voices, no jostling, no impatient queue-shoving or customs line complaints. 27 beings, 9 species, in a loose circle around an 89-kilogram dog that was doing absolutely nothing. It is not a disturbance, Chief. It is the opposite of a disturbance. I do not have a regulatory word for that. Let them stay. She turned to the woman, who had been standing at the booth counter with her arms crossed and her weight on one hip. I have a procedural problem, Voreth said. The woman nodded. You usually do. The transit protocol requires Class 12 containment for your animal, full bioseal, independent atmospheric control, isolation from the general population. If I approve transit under standard protocols, I am authorizing passage of a Class 12 organism without containment, which carries a minimum suspension of my credentials. I know. If I reject transit, the animal returns to the vessel of origin, and you arrange transport through a certified deathworld fauna carrier. 6 to 8 standard weeks. I know that too. Your dog has done this at other stations. Every station. And the outcome? The woman uncrossed her arms. The outcome is always the same. They read the file, they panic, they pull up the protocols, then they look at him. And then they have the same problem you're having. Which is, The forms don't have a field for what he is. Voreth was quiet. Through the window, a second Velisi child had joined the first, both curled against the dog's broad side, their small bodies rising and falling with the rhythm of the dog's breathing. A Pelani trader had sat against the corridor wall, legs extended, expression carrying the quality of someone who has missed a scheduled departure and does not care. A Dreth engineer, still in her work coveralls, a species Voreth had never seen sit on a floor that was not their own quarters, had lowered herself beside the freight handler, and was watching the dog with her chin on her knees. Pellic had returned to the booth. His right hand was damp. His left hand was also damp. "Inspector, I am not certain what to enter in the behavioral assessment field." "Enter what you observed." "What I observed does not correspond to any category in the xenofauna assessment matrix. The matrix for Class 12 begins at hostile and scales upward to extreme lethal. There is no option for," he paused, "for what that animal is doing." "What is it doing, Pellic?" He looked through the window. The freight handler was still humming. The children were still asleep. The data clerk had set his transit pad on the floor and was watching the dog breathe with the focused attention his species usually reserved for complex mathematical proofs. "It is making everyone in the corridor want to sit on the floor." Voreth almost smiled. She caught it. Customs inspectors did not smile during intake processing, but the impulse was there, arriving from the same unclassifiable place that the observation note was coming from. She looked at the corridor and noticed something she had missed. The dog had shifted position at some point during the last few minutes, not much, just enough to accommodate the second Velisi child who had pressed against its other side. The shift had been precise, deliberate. The animal had redistributed its mass to create a warm, stable surface against which two small alien children could lean without slipping, and it had done so without waking either of them. She thought about the species file. Mountain rescue. Locating buried humans in collapsed snow, keeping them alive with body heat. The dog was keeping them warm, not because it had been trained to, not because anyone had asked, but because that was what it was. 900 years of selective breeding for one purpose, find the cold, the lost, the frightened, and be warm beside them, had produced an animal that did it automatically, the way Voreth processed intake forms. Instinct refined into vocation. She noticed something else. The Toreshi merchant who had knelt beside the dog had been joined by a second Toreshi, a younger one, perhaps an apprentice or junior partner. The younger Toreshi was standing behind the kneeling one, and his neck plates were cycling through a pattern Voreth recognized from behavioral training, approach hesitation. The desire to move closer warring with the autonomic assessment that the thing in front of him was, by every metric his biology could measure, a threat. The dog solved it for him. Without lifting its head, without changing its breathing, the dog extended one forepaw approximately 10 centimeters in the younger Toreshi's direction. Just moved its paw. The gesture was so small, so undramatic, that Voreth would have missed it if she had not been watching. But the younger Toreshi saw it, and the approach hesitation pattern in his neck plate stopped, replaced by something Voreth did not have a Toreshi behavioral term for, and he knelt. The dog's tail moved once. Medical Officer Pren, still standing at the edge of the group, raised her scanner and took another reading. She looked at the display. She looked at the dog. She put the scanner in her pocket and sat down on the floor. Her comm chirped, "Vren, Inspector, I have reviewed the feed for 24 minutes. I am not sending the enforcement team." "Understood, Administrator." "I am, however, coming down to the corridor myself. I want to see this animal." Voreth set down her stylus. In 7 years, Vren had never visited the customs floor. He operated from a climate-controlled office on the administrative tier where the air smelled like ozone scrubbed nothing, and the closest biological organism was the ornamental lichen on his desk. She turned to the woman. "Your dog has created an administrative event." The woman's mouth twitched. "He does that?" Is there anything I should tell the station administrator before he arrives? Tell him not to wear anything he cares about. Murphy drools when he's happy, and right now he's very happy. Vren arrived in 4 minutes. He was Telvari, tall, narrow, slate-gray scaling that deepened to charcoal at the joints, the rigid posture of someone who expected his environment to conform to his presence. He walked into corridor 7 with a precise, measured stride. He stopped when he saw the dog. The dog was still sprawled. The children were still curled against its flank. The freight handler was on the floor, no longer humming but sitting with his eyes closed and one hand on the dog's head, palm open, fingers relaxed. The Pelini trader, the Dreth engineer. A Velisi adult who had given up standing altogether. 7 beings seated on a customs corridor floor around a sleeping dog, and none of them appeared to be thinking about their transit schedules. Vren stood at the corridor entrance for 30 seconds without speaking. Voreth watched from the booth, tracking the micro-expressions that crossed his face. The initial alarm, the rapid assessment, the confusion, and then something else, something that moved through his features like weather crossing an open plain, reshaping everything it touched. The dog opened its eyes and looked at him, not with aggression, not with wariness, with the same steady, unhurried gaze it had given everyone else. Its tail moved, one sweep. Vren approached slowly. His rigid posture softened by 1 degree with each step, a loosening so gradual that only someone who had studied Telvari body language for 7 years would have noticed. He stopped 2 meters from the animal and looked down, and the dog looked up, and something passed between them that no protocol had been designed to accommodate. The dog's tail swept again. The freight handler opened one eye, glanced at the station administrator standing in a customs corridor with an expression he clearly did not recognize on his own face, and closed it again without comment. Vren lowered himself to one knee, his slate-gray hand extended, palm down, toward the dog's muzzle. The dog sniffed it, considered it with that same evaluative patience, and then slowly, deliberately, as though bestowing something it had the authority to bestow, pressed the top of its massive head against Vren's palm. Vren's hand curled into the fur. His fingers disappeared into the dense coat, and Voreth saw his expression change in a way she would never forget. The administrative mask, the Telvari composure, the 7 layers of professional detachment that a station administrator maintained, the way a hull maintained pressure, all of it softened. Not in collapse, but in surrender. The way a locked door opens when the right key finds it. He stayed like that for a full minute. Murphy's tail kept time. The corridor held its silence, not the silence of fear, but the silence of something witnessed, something none of them had a name for but all of them recognized. Then Vren stood. He walked to Voreth's booth and keyed the comm from her console. Corridor security, this is Administrator Vren. Stand down. The Earth animal is cleared for unrestricted corridor access during processing. All containment protocols for this organism are suspended pending my direct review. Mark the override under my authorization code. He looked at Voreth. His expression had not fully returned to its administrative setting. There was something in it that the dog had put there, something that did not belong in a customs facility and was not leaving. Process it, he said quietly. Administrator, the DCP requires. I know what the DCP requires, Inspector. I also know what I just felt in that corridor, and the DCP does not have a section for it. Process the animal. He straightened his uniform. There was a wet patch on his knee where he had knelt, and a strand of golden-brown fur clinging to his sleeve. He did not brush it off. He walked back toward the administrative tier, and Voreth watched him go the same measured stride, but not the same man. Something in the set of his shoulders had changed, something small and structural, as though a tension he had carried so long he had forgotten it was there had been quietly set down. Pren appeared at the booth window. Inspector, for the record, I am noting in the medical log that the Earth animal's presence produced measurable anxiolytic effects across 9 species with no adverse reactions. I am also noting that my own cortisol level dropped 14% during 2 minutes of proximity contact. She paused. I would like to formally request that this station explore the feasibility of a permanent Earth Animal Companion program for high-stress processing areas. Voreth stared at her. Doctor, the animal has been in this corridor for less than an hour. Sometimes an hour is enough data. Pren left. Voreth sat in her booth and processed the fact that the station's medical officer had just recommended, in an official capacity, that they acquire more of these animals. She thought about the spectral scanner. She thought about the drool. She thought about the shedding rate measured in liters and the saliva enzyme that dissolved document binding adhesive. She thought about the diplomatic gift basket. She thought about all of it, and she understood with a clarity that surprised her that none of it mattered, not because the problems were not real, but because the thing the dog had done to the corridor was also real, and the forms did not have a way to weigh one against the other. Voreth pulled up the customs exemption form. Edge cases organisms that fell outside standard classification, situations where the framework could not accommodate what was actually in front of you. She had never used it. Every organism she had processed in 7 years had fit into a box on a form. This animal did not fit into a box. This animal had eaten a couch cushion and was afraid of a vacuum attachment, and was currently the emotional center of gravity for a customs corridor full of beings who had never seen an Earth dog before and could not stop touching it. Under classification override, she typed, companion animal. Under justification, species behavioral profile, direct observation, administrative override, and the professional judgment of this office. Under containment waiver rationale, she paused. She looked at the corridor one more time. The freight handler had finally stood, his enormous frame unfolding from the floor with the slow reluctance of someone leaving somewhere warm. He looked at his own hands, the hands that moved cargo and shouldered mechs and gripped things with industrial force, and then at the dog, and his face carried something Voreth had never seen on a Kalsarathi. Tenderness. Raw, unguarded, the kind a species built for heavy labor and blunt confrontation kept buried so deep that most of them forgot it was there. The Dreth engineer stood slowly, and she looked at the space where her knee had been near the dog's back as though measuring the residual warmth. The Toreshi merchant was still looking at her own hand, turning it over, examining the palm as though something had been left on it that she could not see. The corridor had changed. Voreth could feel it, could measure it in the way the space felt different from the space it had been 50 minutes ago, though nothing physical had moved. The lighting was the same. The walls were the same. The regulatory signage was the same: biological cargo, compliance mandatory. But the room held something it had not held before, something the dog had brought with it the way it had brought the drool, and the fur, and the 412 organic compounds. Only this was not in the spectral readout, and there was no field for it on any form she had ever been given. She typed, the containment protocols are designed for organisms whose threat is behavioral. This organism's threat is physiological, but its behavior is the inverse of the classification it carries. I am unable to reconcile the regulatory framework with the animal I have observed. The species file describes a Class 12 apex predator. What I have observed is an 89-kilogram patient. I am approving transit under customs exemption authority and accepting full professional responsibility for the decision. She signed the form. Her hands were steady. You're clear, she told the woman. The woman looked at her. No surprise, she had said the outcome was always the same, and Voreth believed her. But something quieter, recognition, the look of someone who had carried a particular weight through a particular kind of opposition for a long time and was acknowledging briefly that someone else had understood it. Thank you, the woman said. She said it the way a person says a thing they mean, without needing to decorate it. Voreth nodded. Your animal contaminated my spectral scanner. I am filing a separate equipment damage report, and the cleaning costs will be assessed to your transit account. The woman's mouth twitched. Fair. And Pellic requires a new uniform sleeve, possibly two. The saliva volume was significant. Also fair. And your dog has shed enough fur in my corridor to clog the atmospheric filtration system for an entire deck section. And I will be filing a maintenance request that will take the environmental team the better part of a shift to resolve. Do you want me to apologize for that? I want you to acknowledge that your 89-kilogram companion has generated more paperwork in 50 minutes than any organism I have processed in 7 years, including the Crescent venom crawler that dissolved a section of bulkhead. The woman looked at her, and for the first time the tired expression shifted into something else. Not a smile exactly, something warmer and more complicated. He's a Saint Bernard, she said, as though that explained everything. And Voreth, who had read 147 pages of species file and watched a station administrator kneel on a customs corridor floor, understood that it did. Woman turned to leave, then stopped. She looked at Voreth through the booth window, and something in her expression shifted, the tired calm giving way briefly to something more exposed. The last station tried to sedate him, she said. Way Station Orville 12. They had the enforcement team there in 8 minutes. Full bioseal chemical dispersal units, the whole protocol. They hit him with a broad-spectrum sedative before I could get to the corridor. She paused. Do you know what a sedated Saint Bernard does? Voreth did not. He lay down, which is what he was already doing. The sedative hit him and he did not fall because he was already on the floor. His breathing slowed and his eyes closed, and every alien in that corridor went completely silent, because what they were watching was not a dangerous animal being neutralized. What they were watching was a sleeping dog. And they realized, every one of them, all at once, that the most dangerous thing the sedative had done was take away the tail wag. The sedative had not made the room safer. It had made it sadder. She said it without emphasis, without dramatic weight. She said it the way someone describes a thing that happened, a fact filed alongside other facts, and its quietness was what made it land. Voreth did not respond. There was nothing in the regulatory framework for responding to something like that. Voreth watched the woman walk back to the dog. She crouched beside him, one hand on his massive head, and said something quiet, too quiet for the audio pickup, a word or two that was between them and no one else. The dog's tail swept once, heavy and sure. The woman straightened and took the leash, and the dog rose. The corridor changed when he stood. Every being within range shifted, not away, not in fear, but in the particular way things shift when a large, warm presence moves, and the absence it leaves is felt immediately. The Velocity children woke and reached for the fur that was no longer there. The freight handler looked at his empty hands. The data clerk picked up his transit pad and stared at it as though he had forgotten what it was for. The Dreth engineer looked at the space where the dog had been, the way a person looks at a chair someone has just left, aware of the warmth still in it, aware it is fading. The dog walked beside the woman through the cleared customs gate, his massive frame filling the passage, his paws heavy on the deck plating, his jowls swaying, a thin line of drool already forming at the corner of his mouth. He walked the way he had since the moment he came down the ramp, without urgency, without display, without any awareness that the station's entire regulatory apparatus had bent around his existence. He was a dog. He was walking with his person. That was the whole of it. Voreth watched them go. The corridor was quiet, not the empty quiet of an unused space, but the quiet of a room after something has happened in it that the room has not yet forgotten. Passengers stood where they had been, some looking at their own hands as though checking for evidence of something they could not name. Pellic appeared at her side. Inspector, the observation note you were composing, what classification will you assign? Voreth looked at her terminal. The note was still open, the cursor blinking. She thought about the 47-field intake form, the 93-page transit protocol, the 7-tier behavioral assessment matrix, and the 11-category threat classification scale, and none of them contained what she needed. She typed one final line. Addendum: I have submitted a formal request to the Galactic Fauna Registry to create a new behavioral classification. The proposed designation is Class 1 Passive Apex Companion. I am aware this category does not currently exist. It should. She saved the file. She closed the terminal. She looked at the spectral scanner, still displaying the 412 compound saliva analysis, the drool dried and crusted on the aperture housing. Pelican. Inspector. Order a replacement scanner, and file this under a new incident category. What category? Voreth thought about the freight handler's hands on the dog's ears, the children asleep against its ribs, the administrator on one knee with his fingers in the fur, the woman's quiet word and the dog's single, heavy tail sweep, an 89-kilogram patient that had walked through her station and left it different. Customs exception, deathworld companion, subdesignation Murphy. She reached for the cleaning kit. The scanner was not going to decontaminate itself. The atmospheric filtration alarm triggered 17 minutes later, when the dog's shed fur reached the intake vents on the starboard side of the corridor. Maintenance Team 6 responded, extracted approximately 1.4 liters of golden brown fur from the primary filter housing, and filed a report that Voreth would read the next morning with her second cup of thermal broth. The report's final line, written by a maintenance technician named Gorak who had worked on the station for 11 years and had never filed an incident note with an emotional component, read, "Hair sample retained. It is very soft." The spectral scanner was replaced 2 days later. Voreth kept the saliva analysis printout. She told herself it was for the file, for the regulatory record, for the formal request she had submitted to the Galactic Fauna Registry. She kept it in the second drawer of her desk, behind the spare stylus and the emergency ration pack she had never opened, and sometimes on long shifts, when the corridor was empty and the queue was short and the station hummed with the particular quality of a place where nothing remarkable was happening, she would open the drawer and look at it. 412 compounds, 16 unknown, 1 dog. The request to the Galactic Fauna Registry was acknowledged 9 days later. The acknowledgement was a standard automated response, but someone, a clerk, a reviewer, perhaps a xenobiologist who had encountered the word patients in the behavioral profile and understood what it meant, had added a handwritten annotation in the margin of the digital form. It read, noted, under review. Recommend field observation. Voreth filed the acknowledgement in the customs archive, in the new category she had created. She thought about adding a subcategory for future entries, in case another Earth dog came through Pelic 3, in case another inspector stood in this booth and read a species file, and watched a corridor full of strangers learn something they had not known they needed to learn. She decided against it. If another Earth dog came through, the inspector would not need a subcategory. The inspector would need a cleaning kit, a replacement scanner, and a willingness to accept that the forms had a gap in them exactly the size and shape of something warm and patient and impossibly, stubbornly alive. The gap had a name. The name was Murphy.